Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Finding HR Clients Before They Ask for Help live expert session. We're super excited to be delivering this content for you. We built this presentation in large part because selling HR services is so hard. It's hard to find clients. It's hard to get those people that you find to actually move through conversations with you. So this is a really hot topic for a lot of HR consultants. I know when you're working in-house, you don't always necessarily have experience selling yourself or selling services. And so this is probably an area where a lot of HR consultants don't feel the most comfortable. And part of why we're going to be focusing on it today. Just a quick introduction. My name is Dominic Lafort. I'm the founder and CEO at Sherlock. We're the all-in-one client management system built specifically for HR consultants and fractional HR leaders. Before launching this business, I used to work in-house for a national HR tech company that sold HR services to tens of thousands of business owners nationwide here in the US. As a product marketing leader for this operation, I helped with sales and marketing. And I say that because there's a lot of marketing and sales advice that you'll see out there for even other service providers. Unless you do this work in the HR space, it's going to feel different, right? SMB buyers behave differently than regular buyers. They interact differently with HR. And so there's a lot of nuance here. And that's part of why, as a value add for the software that we provide, we provide resources just like this. Actually, I met Josh during my time as a product marketing leader many, many years ago. I'm super excited for him to be joining us today. Josh, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you for an introduction.
Yeah, thanks, Dom. Yeah, like Dom mentioned, we met a while ago now. I come from a product marketing background, so messaging, positioning, segmentation, the things that we'll be talking about today is a critical part of what I did. I have since gone on my own and I run Slingshot Go to Market, and we help businesses figure out who to target and what to say to them. And more specifically, we focus on doing so through pain-based segmentation and identifying prospects in pain and then reaching out to them at the right time with the right message and armed with the context of that pain that they're experiencing. And so this is equally applicable to software businesses as it is to service-based businesses. I use this framework, this methodology for my own outreach as well, and it works. And so that's what we'll be talking about today. So really excited to share some of my lessons and learnings.
Very humble of you. Josh has also implemented a lot of this strategy for Sherlock, and it's played a really big role in our own growth with the community. So because we've seen so much success, I wanted to share it with all of you because I know we're all facing challenges in client acquisition and securing new business. And I think this is definitely an approach that works really, really well for solopreneurs. Our agenda. So today we're going to be going through our all new 20-page playbook, How to Find HR Clients Before They Ask. For those of you joining the call today, you should have received an email to this playbook in your inbox with a link to start viewing this resource. For those of you joining this presentation asynchronously, you can go ahead and scan that QR code. It'll take you to a landing page on our website where you can go ahead and input your email and get a free copy of this playbook in your inbox automatically. We're going to be combing through the entire playbook, looking at the buyer's journey, how business owners think about buying HR services. Josh is going to be diving deep into pain-first prospecting and 7 signals HR consultants need to know. So without further ado, let's talk about understanding the buyer's journey. This is really important because buyers move through very predictable stages of purchasing. And one thing I will say, your timing matters more than visibility. And I don't say that because visibility doesn't matter. Visibility does matter. It's an incredible lever for long-term growth. But you can be visible to hundreds or thousands of business owners. The only way you're going to get a contract signed is if someone actually feels the urge to take action. And this is why timing is really important for navigating sales, because just because you have a large audience doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be able to sell to them. Now, an inside look at the conversion funnel, this is something that's really useful to understand. As I mentioned, buyers move through predictable stages of readiness, and understanding where a buyer is within the conversion funnel is going to help you approach the conversation in a way that matches their level of readiness. So if we look at the top of the funnel, the awareness stage. This is where a business owner is maybe loosely aware that they have an HR problem. Maybe they know they need some support, or they learned about a regulation that they're like, hey, that might be a problem for me in the future. This is really just like a high level, they are aware of a problem, but not necessarily any further than that initial thought. When you move down funnel just a bit, you're into the consideration stage. And this is where the buyer, they recognize, hey, there's a problem, but they're also at a point where they're saying, what should I do about this? What options are available? How should I approach this? And so this is where you are actively considering different solutions that are available. And when you move a little bit further down, you're now into the evaluation stage. And so this is where the buyer has a few different solutions that are actively in front of them that they're considering. And so from an HR service providing perspective, the business owner might be weighing your consulting services against a PEO, against doing literally nothing, right? No action is competitive to what you do. That's the evaluation step, is what decision are they going to make? And at the very bottom of the funnel is where you have conversion. And this is where the business owner either takes action with you, takes action with a competitor, or doesn't convert at all. And so this is really important to understand, because when you understand the conversion funnel as you're interacting with different buyers, try to gauge where they're at in their buying process. If you're talking to someone who's at the top of the funnel, it's going to require a lot of time and effort on your part to nurture them down funnel, because business owners will stay in the awareness or consideration phase until something happens in their business or something is about to happen that they're really nervous about. It's those external events that are actually going to create urgency and reduce tolerance for risk. And so those external moments are actually going to be the biggest drivers for buyers moving down funnel. And it's part of why this presentation is so focused on what are those moments that are causing business owners to move from being loosely aware of a problem to, I need to solve this, who can I talk to, right? Now, we have done a lot of research on how HR consultants and fractional HR leaders grow. Overwhelmingly, 90% say that referrals are a top resource for finding new clients. And there's a reason for that, because when a client referral actually lands on your plate, the business owner that's being referred has already acknowledged a problem, and they may have also already considered options. So referrals are generally sending you leads that are at the bottom of the funnel. And they're at a point where they're not thinking, do I solve this, or how do I solve this? They're like, what's going to happen next? The issue with referrals is that they're really unpredictable. And you've probably felt this if your business is heavily reliant on referrals. You can't control when someone in your network detects a potential client who's experiencing a problem. You don't have control over them knowing what signals to look for, and you don't have control over them actually seeing a signal that is useful to you and sending that client your way. And so this is where our whole strategy is focused on: how do you find clients who behave similarly to referrals, in the sense that they're coming to you at the bottom of the funnel without relying on someone outside of your control? So understanding why business owners buy HR services is really important. And this is something that we see across the board, certainly from my time in sales enablement. There's really a few triggers behind decision-making. There's visible risk. The business owner is actively seeing things that they're afraid of, or they see things coming down the pike that they are afraid of. These often look like an employee claim that just got filed. It can look like a regulatory change that's going to have a huge impact on their business. I'm curious, in the chat, what are some risk factors that you see clients reaching out to you about? What's going on in their business that says, hey, I need to talk? Claims, yeah, that's a big one. What else do we got there? Turnover, misclassifications, yep. FMLA, okay, yeah. So you're all aware of this. Like, there are definitely risks that a potential client may experience and say, ooh, we need to figure something out ASAP. Now, on the middle one is financial strain. And this is where people problems are becoming real expenses. So turnover is separately a risk in its own right, but turnover is actually a really great example of a people problem that's causing financial hardship on the business. And so this is a different angle behind a trigger. And lastly, we have complexity. And I think someone here in the chat talked about expanding states. This is a really great example of complexity. The business owner is expanding and they're taking on additional complexity that their team doesn't have the capability to handle. And complexity can look like expanding states. It can also look like a company going through massive growth or contraction, right? And so these are like big changes happening in the business that add complexity to the point where leadership within the business thinks to themselves, I don't know if we have the tools to handle this on our own. And so these are some of the triggers for why a business owner actually moves from being aware of a problem to starting to take action and actually explore what are different solutions that could answer the question of how do we solve this pain that I'm experiencing. So now let's talk about pain first prospecting. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Josh because we know that buyers reach out when they're experiencing something wrong. So how do you prospect for those moments? Josh, I'll turn this over to you.
Thanks, Dom. All right. So this is the stuff that gets me excited. It's the stuff that the work that I do with my clients is grounded on. And so if you've done any form of list building for doing, cold outreach or even campaigns, advertising campaigns, you'll know that historically and traditionally, these lists and targeting itself have been built on traditional criteria like demographics, firmographics, and technographics. And so what are some examples of those things? What industry are they in? Where are they located? How many employees they've got? What technology they use? Revenue amount? What funding round they've got if they're VC funded? And that has largely been a function of that is the information that these list building tools and even tools like, Sales Navigator as an example, when I say list building tools, Sales Navigator, Apollo, Zoom Info, some of which you might have used, others you might not have, but it's largely a function of that's the criteria that we've been allowed to historically target by or filter by in the past. Now, with the rise of LLMs, we can now look much further beyond that at what data exists on the internet that we could potentially use to identify prospects that are experiencing a specific situation that our solution's uniquely positioned to solve. And that's essentially what pain first targeting is and how it's different from, say, firmographics or demographic targeting. Firmographics is usually just a fancy word for criteria that surfaces the characteristics of a company. So that's essentially what pain first targeting is about. It's about finding those signals in real time, as close to when they happen as possible. And sometimes that means that the people that are experiencing that pain don't actually even know about it. And we'll get into like some examples in a second to crystallize that. So I think this is really a shift in thinking around how we do prospecting. And it's one of those things that when I kind of came across this myself, I couldn't unsee it. So again, traditional targeting is about who could I go after? Pain first targeting is shifting that from these static characteristics to more situational triggers. So instead of asking who is my ICP, who's my ideal client profile, ask who in my target market is actively experiencing a problem I'm uniquely positioned to solve or well positioned to solve. That's the shift in thinking that I think this type of approach provides. And it's a really important reframe here. Now, you're probably asking, yeah, but doesn't that mean that my total pool of people shrinks? Yes, it does, but you're able to be much more efficient and effective with who you go after, knowing that the situation they're in means they're a higher propensity to buy, which is a much better position to be in and gives you more leverage as a vendor and more importantly, as a strategic thought partner for them as well.
Just to clarify, Josh, I think the point that is being made is that it's not that you're leaving your target market, like that is still preserved. You're just digging a layer deeper into who within that market is actually going to convert.
Yep, bang on. Yeah. So think about this as like, segments and sub-segments. There's like the total addressable market that you could kind of go after, which, might be, as an example here, you'll see on the left-hand side, medical practices with 200 to 100 employees in Portland, Oregon. That might be your total addressable market, but not everyone in that market, not every business in that market is going to need your services. Nor does any of these characteristics surface or show you when someone is in urgent need to purchase. So you're kind of left guessing as to who within that list of medical practices with 200 to 100 employees in Portland, Oregon are going to be in need of your services. And as a result, the message that you typically send them, if you're doing cold outreach, is very general because you don't know the situation that they're in. You can make some inferences, but you don't know the situation that they're in. Now, pain first targeting is looking at that segment and then a sub-segment of that. So as an example, it might be medical practices with 200 to 100 employees in Portland, Oregon that received an OSHA citation and don't have internal HR staff. And so, sure, again, that is fairly niche, that definition of the segment, but the situational description really emphasizes why that specific person, that specific company needs you and why they need you now. And as a result, your messaging to them, your outreach to them can be much, much more compelling because you understand what they're going through in a way that they might not even understand. And I think that's the important part here. So that's the side-by-side comparison of how these two approaches are different. It's not to say traditional targeting, there's no room for it. It's to say, how do you layer on these pain signals to complement what you're already doing and to kind of like build on some of these other traditional targeting criteria.
If I were to go onto LinkedIn Sales Navigator and use the traditional targeting filters, industry, medical, 20 to 100 employees, and then Portland, Oregon, I would expect to see a lead list of a couple hundred business owners. I think that's, to your point, like when you go that layer deeper, that list of say 800 is going to drop to maybe 50 or 60, right? And so you're really cutting out a lot of the low potential conversion value leads. And this is where you mentioned efficiency as a key piece of this. If you're a solopreneur or you're working on a small team, don't waste your time reaching out to hundreds. Spend the time reaching out to that dozen or handful that you're actually going to see results with.
Also, again, what it means for the message that you send them when you get to this level of specificity as well. And we'll crystallize that, what I'm talking about, in a second. So I'll actually show you an example outreach message. But you're able to communicate your understanding of the situation that they're in, sometimes better than they're able to communicate it themselves. And so when you take this approach, you come across as an expert in the situation that they're experiencing, rather than just a vendor who is kind of guessing and in many instances is flaunting their own services, their own case studies, their own previous clients that they've worked with, and mentions nothing about the situation that they're going through because we don't really know what they're going through. We're having to guess. And so it's got many advantages, one of which is the messaging in addition to efficiencies as well. I've kind of touched on this already, but you can think about this as a few cohorts of companies sharing a specific verifiable signal of readiness. And so there might be these sub-segments that I talked about. As an example, companies approaching a regulatory threshold, and there'll be a number of companies that sit in that bucket who you can target with a similar type of message. Similarly, there might be organizations posting their first HR role. There are going to be a number of businesses that are exhibiting that kind of signal at the same time. And again, you would treat them as a separate cohort. Businesses experiencing rapid headcount growth is another one. And these are kind of like simplified versions. We'll go into some more nuanced examples in a second. Employees with recent compliance violations. Each of these segments are going to have businesses that are in those segments that share a situation that's common across all of them. And you can then reach out to them with a similar message, which means that you're kind of segmenting around some of these kind of like shared signals. So if you really think about it that way, there's not any one segment that's going to be, I think, relevant to what it is that you do. There might be multiple. In many instances, there are kind of multiple. Your job is to go and figure out what are the segments that are relevant to me and what it is that I do, the services that I offer and who I offer them to. And then what are the pain signals that are tied to those segments? But know that there are these shared kind of signals within the segments themselves. So you've already asked it in the chat, identifying the right pain first signals. The starting point to get to how do I identify pain first targeting is look inwards first. You need to get really crystal clear on what are the problems that you solve best, and get more specific than I help with HR, with our HR services. What are the actual tangible issues, the tangible pain points that you help them with? I mean, we've already kind of talked about some of them in the chat: expanding states, harassment cases, leadership challenges, employee turnover. These are great. These are exactly the types of things that you need to kind of think about for your own business. And not all of those things are going to be applicable to you. The best place to start is think about what clients have I had and why did they come to me? What caused them to come to me? What caused them to wake up one day, get out of the bed and say, we can't keep doing what we've been doing. Something needs to change. Sometimes you're going to know that. Sometimes you need to go and actually just ask them, because you might not have actually asked them what happened, what was going on in your world that made you either reach out or made you be open to a conversation that ultimately led me to working with you. So that's another aspect, the types of clients you want more of. And typically they are your best fit clients. Who are the clients that you've loved working with? Who are those clients and what were they experiencing? What were they going through prior to working with you? Also, you might want to factor in what are the services you want to grow. There might be some services that you don't want to offer on an ongoing basis. And so it would make sense to exclude that from your analysis so you don't get more people that need that service because you're not wanting to do that anymore. So these are all going to be bespoke to you in your situation, the type of HR consulting work that you do. There are many different permutations of HR consulting. I'm sure there are many different types of clients that people work with, industries. And so this approach works best when the signals closely align with your positioning. So do the work, go and figure out what are some of these angles that are most relevant to you. And the workbook that Dom mentioned at the start, that will contain some prompts, some questions for you to kind of work through in order to get to that definition. At a high level, we've talked about this first step. Then comes a few other steps. Once you've defined what your practice is uniquely positioned to deliver and who you're uniquely positioned to deliver that for and where you want to grow, that should then naturally lead to what are the pain signals that are most relevant to me. And look, I'm not a HR expert here, so I'm just kind of regurgitating what some of you have already mentioned. Claims, what else? Leadership challenges, leadership changes as well as another one. Expanding states, those types of things. Surface what are these pain signals and document what are these pain signals that are relevant to me that would surface prospects that are going through a similar situation to what my best fit customers were going through. And ideally these would be verifiable, so we can actually go and find some of these pain signals online and we can point to them and say, we know you're going through X, or at the very least, we are very confident that you're going through X. It might not be 100% confidence, but let's call it 80% confidence, which is still much better than guessing with no evidence. They should be time sensitive. So someone received an OSHA fine a year ago is less relevant than someone that received an OSHA fine a month ago or 2 weeks ago. And so the more recent and fresh that pain signal, the better for you, because it's obviously top of mind if it's more recent. And in some instances, they don't even know that they're about to experience the pain. It should also be specific and directly connected to your service. And so again, this is just mapping these pain signals back to what it is that you do and making sure that they are relevant to you in your business. Lastly, it's building segments, finding businesses that fit the profile or experiencing some of these pain signals, often multiple cohorts. Don't be afraid to split these out into different kind of sub-segments that share these pain signals that you can target. And I would treat them as separate campaigns. So we've put together a custom GPT, which will help you identify some of these pain signals that are specific to your own HR consulting businesses. And so there's a QR code here that you can scan. Dom, I'm assuming that you'll send this either as a follow-up or in a pre-email.
Yeah, so this QR code is available for you on screen. It's going to be in the playbook that you received in your inbox earlier. And so you'll be able to scan that QR code and start engaging with the custom GPT. It'll start by asking you questions about your business, since we know that looking inwards is a key part of this strategy to understand more about you, your consulting business, the services you offer. And then once the GPT has enough context about who you are and what you do and who you help, it'll start recommending some different pain signals that you can focus on. And again, it's AI, so take it with a grain of salt. But I think that as you're kind of exploring whether this is an approach that makes sense for you, it's really useful to understand when we say pain signal and cohort of pain segments, what does that actually mean based on what your business looks like? So go ahead and scan that. It'll open up another tab for you, and engage with it when you have a few minutes, and ask some questions and see what comes up, because I think that'll be really helpful to sort of jog your brain juices and kind of get you thinking about how to implement.
Yeah. And the more kind of context, the more details you can give it, the better. As much detail as you can give it, it loves kind of context, it loves details. So please do that. One thing I don't think I've mentioned, I think it's really important, is if you serve a number of different industries, as an example. So let's say you are industry agnostic. I would strongly recommend, at least for this exercise, picking a vertical or an industry that you do either the most work in, that you see the best results for, that you enjoy working in, because the data sources and the pain signals that you can use in many instances are industry specific. They are typically niche data sources that apply to a specific industry. Now, that's not strictly true, because things like OSHA fines, FMLA, employee turnover is industry agnostic. But I would just encourage you to, if you can, and if you're not already verticalized, that is working in a specific industry, pick a industry or two and feed that information around, like the work that you've done in that industry, for the sake of this exercise, because I think you'll get better results.
We're going to kind of briefly go through each of the signals. We have about 20 minutes left for our session. And so a lot of these you can get even deeper insight when you're combing through the playbook. But Josh, go ahead, and why don't you breathe us through some HR signals they could look for?
Yeah, so let's make this a little bit more concrete. I want to caveat this by saying that I'm not a HR expert by any stretch of the imagination. So these are just some example signals that we've surfaced to really illustrate and demonstrate what this would look like. Each one of these is going to reflect a documented event that's happening, a trigger in a time-sensitive way, and it's going to surface like observable change that increases the urgency for services like what you guys offer. And so use these as inspiration. You might want to use a combination of these as well. Oftentimes, it's not just one specific data point. It might be multiple data points that you need to tie together to paint this picture and create the narrative that you want to create when doing outreach. So first one, as far as I understand it, when companies hit 50 employees, a number of regulatory compliance requirements lands on their desks. And so typically speaking, what you want to do is identify companies that are sort of between 40 to 49 employees. So this number is where federal requirements kick in. So FMLA, ACA employee mandates begin to apply. In many instances, these employees don't know that these requirements are upcoming. And so it introduces compliance risk, reporting requirements, benefit administration complexity, and without preparation, exposes them to some of these issues, if not addressed. And so where can you find these? LinkedIn and company headcount ranges, again, imperfect, but they'll give you a rough idea of where these companies sit, especially like bigger companies. When I say bigger, like not small businesses. Headcount growth trends as well. You might get them on, sites like Indeed as well. Job posting signaling expansion as well into certain states. funding announcements. So sometimes they mention employee counts in funding announcements. Wherever you can get that information, and sometimes it requires you looking at multiple different data sources to validate that, or to at least come up with a hypothesis around how many employees they've got. This 50 employee compliance cliff is a really big one, because if they don't do these things, it means big fines, legal action in some cases. So that's one pain signal.
Yeah, so I'm just going to jump in here real quick. The pain signal around the 50 employee compliance cliff, that's a US based cliff that we're describing, where federal regulations do kick in around that point. There are other compliance cliffs at different headcounts, either within smaller jurisdictions. This can also look different if you're in a completely different country where maybe it's 25, maybe it's 15. Yeah. So just kind of keep an eye out on what are those different moments where the business is likely to be experiencing pain. I'm really glad we spent a good amount of time on this one, because we do have an example of messaging you could use for this cliff. I'll kind of breeze us through the next few just so we can get to some of the messaging. Another one is recent OSHA violations. This, of course, is a very time-sensitive issue. These OSHA violations are public searchable records, which makes it really easy to verify that this occurred. So this would be a great one to look at. First, HR job posting. So looking at job boards and reading the job descriptions for HR roles, they'll often indicate that this is the first hire within that department. And so it can be useful to see businesses are actively looking to fill HR roles within their operation, because that could be you either in the interim during their search or potentially as a replacement. Now, the state law changes with upcoming deadlines. And this is a really great one if you are subscribed to state labor department websites or legislative update trackers. If you see that there's a regulation changing, let's call it the minimum wage. I know here in California, it feels like I could drive 10 minutes away from my house and be in a different jurisdiction with a different minimum wage. But when you are looking at a specific target market and you see that there's a regulation changing that impacts them, a state law change is a really great time-sensitive change to be able to reach out and be like, hey, I saw the minimum wage is going up in your area. Do you have a plan in place? I noticed that you have a lot of hourly workers, and this can be a strain. Another one to look for is rapid headcount growth. This is something that if the business is rapidly expanding, they're almost definitely having a lot of complexity around HR issues that you should target. This again is headcount, so you're going to be finding it in similar places to the earlier example. Glassdoor or review platform red flags. Someone mentioned in the chat, it can be hard to find out whether they have leadership or infrastructure issues. Glassdoor is going to be a huge window for you into some of what's going on in the business. So looking at some Glassdoor reviews for potential prospects in your area to understand what employees are saying about the experience of working there. I would never recommend going to a business owner and be like, hey, I heard your employees hate you. But you can definitely use it as a window into like, the employees at this business are expressing things that would point to problems I can sell to. And to the same end, finding actual claims or legal action online. Court cases are often publicly available. You got to be sensitive in how you approach it. But these, of course, are real problems. You as an HR professional are not going to be supporting the legal process. That's an area where it does move into a lawyer's domain. However, oftentimes the problems that landed them in a legal issue are things that you can fix so it doesn't happen again, right? So this is a great pain signal to look for. What are businesses within my target market are actively experiencing some type of legal pain? So just to kind of comb through a couple different ideas, again, your specific pain signal will look different based on your business and based on the market that you're serving. Josh, I'll go ahead and throw it over to you. How do you create a conversation in a moment of pain?
Yeah. Just quickly before we move on to that, I want to say don't be scared off if you're not in the US because they aren't relevant to you. There are country-specific versions of that. I know Australia has a version of all these things that we kind of talked about. So when you're using that GPT that we created, mention the country that you operate in, whether it's the US or Australia or Canada or whatever, and it will give you country-specific data sources that you can leverage as well. So what does this mean for your outreach message? Historically, or traditionally, I should say, outreach has focused around the sender. It's typically me. We do these types of things. We offer these types of services. We work with these types of clients, and we'll give you this type of outcome. traditionally it doesn't really focus on the person that you're reaching out to, because traditionally we haven't had this access to this information, at least in a easy to consume way, which is what these LLMs allow us to do now, is go and find these signals and find companies affected by these signals at scale. So now it's not to say that you need to go straight to LLMs to do this. You could very easily, and in fact, I encourage you to go and find these signals and start sending outreach manually, but we can get to this point of doing it at scale much more easily. And that means that we're able to go from this generic messaging that's largely centered on the sender, which is why most outreach fails, because it feels transactional, it feels like cold outreach, and it indicates that you don't know anything about the situation that they're going through. In fact, you might not even mention at all what they're going through. This means that you get lost in a sea of sameness, right? They might receive multiple emails either a day or a week or a month that are like that, and doesn't separate you from everyone else that's sending these emails. So this is why it's critically important to understand your business, look inwards to then find the signals that are relevant to you and what you do, because then you can stand out from the crowd. So what does pain first outreach look like? There's 3 parts to a pain first outreach message, and that is firstly the context. And that's leading with that context up front. So referencing the specific trigger you observed, the verifiable trigger that you observed, keeping it brief and factual. You don't need to go into detail. In many instances, they're going to know this trigger, but you want to say that I understand what you're going through. Then you want to share an insight. So explain what that trigger means for them in a way that really positions you as an expert and shows and demonstrates that you truly understand what they're going through, in a way that they might not be able to even communicate themselves. So share an insight about that context, which you know that they're experiencing. And then this is where it really, I think, separates you from everyone else, is deliver something of value up front without any expectation of anything in return. So giving them something that is immediately applicable, and that the benchmark I like to use is that they would pay to receive. The goal here is to add value without expecting anything in return, knowing that if you do these things, naturally they're going to say, how can you help me? So let's use this as an example. Hi, John. I noticed your team is at 47 employees. Congrats on the growth. When you cross 50, several federal requirements activate, including FMLA and ACA employer obligations. Many founders overlook the additional reporting and policy updates required at this size. I put together a short breakdown outlining what changes at 50 employees and the typical preparation timeline, sharing it here in case it's useful. And so this is, when you compare this to a standard outreach message, which might look something like, hi, John, I noticed that you recently raised a Series A. Congratulations. We offered HR services and we've worked with client X, Y, and Z. Would you like to book a call with us? Very drastic difference in the messages that you're sending them. And I would encourage you to deliver this value permissionlessly. Deliver them the value permissionlessly up front and then walk away. There's something amazing about the dynamic that creates when you're able to demonstrate these things and deliver value through that outreach messaging, because you know the situation that they're going through. So this is what it looks like when you identify these pain signals and you get really clear on what the pain signals are that you want to go after. I encourage you to keep it very short and succinct. You don't need to sell everything all at once, but this is kind of what that looks like. So I know we're coming towards the end. I want to leave some space for questions. I would encourage you to, if you haven't already, look at the worksheet, the playbook. I would actually encourage you to go through this, at least some of these steps yourself first, before looking at the GPT. If you're getting stuck on like ideas, especially around like what pain signals might be relevant to you, then lean on the GPT. But take a human first approach to this and then supplement that with the GPT and its output. Dom.
Amazing. Question for you in the chat here. Do you know of a way to identify companies who are merging or acquiring businesses and need change management help? Is that something you have an answer for?
Yeah, so acquiring, there's obviously the announcements which happens after the fact. The quicker you can get on those announcements, obviously, the better. Failing that, how can you do it prior to? There's no perfect way to do it prior to the actual official announcements. Sometimes these companies, typically they're larger companies that do this, might hint at it. They might be like board meeting notes. I know, like as an example, I do a lot of work in healthcare. A lot of hospitals, public hospitals in the US and Australia as well, they release their board meeting notes, and they might hint at that in those board meeting notes, those minutes, which are released publicly. Sometimes you need to make inferences about who they might be talking to, but failing an official announcement, you kind of just have to, you do sometimes have to read between the lines. So it's a bit of an imperfect science, but I would encourage you to look for these alerts for when these acquisition announcements, merger announcements are made. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, there's actually a website, I believe it's called Biz Buy Sell, which won't necessarily tell you if the business was sold, but seeing what businesses are listed on those sites can give you a window into business owners who may be dealing with some type of merger acquisition later should they achieve a sale. Great question. We do have a really exciting offer for everybody, which is a Pain First Prospecting Launch Kit. If you're interested in getting started with Pain First Prospecting, and this is something you're ready to take seriously, we do have a package available for you where you can get 3 one-to-one expert coaching sessions where we can help you define your prospecting strategy, guide your outreach, and cultivate skills with this program. You'll also receive a signal-aligned outreach system, which has a pre-built initial message that you can use with reaching out to potential clients, as well as some follow-up strategies, along with a custom lead magnet. So part of this strategy is giving value up front. We'll help you come up with a checklist or a lead magnet that you can use to drive conversions. Lastly, you'll also receive 100 curated prospects that are aligned with your pain-based segment. So for example, let's say you decide, I want to target business owners about to hit 50 employees and have no HR internal support. We can help build you a list of that audience so that you can begin putting this into practice. The total package value of this is $1,500. However, for those of you joining the call, you can save 30% with the code HR Clients. One quick note, this offer is only available for 10 HR consultants. So if it's something you're interested in, go ahead and scan that QR code. That HR Clients code will work if you're one of the first 10. Otherwise, you can purchase at full price. Just something to throw out there, because we know that part of this is a new workflow, but part of it is skill too, and we're here to support you along that journey. As always, feel free to join our newsletter. We'd love to invite you to join our growing community. We have over 2,000 HR consultants and fractional HR leaders who are subscribed. This will give you early access to all of the amazing resources and events that we have coming up, purpose-built for HR consultants and fractional HR leaders. With that, we are done for the day. We hope that you'll reach out to us with any questions you may have at info@sherlock.com. Josh, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, great having you. Everyone, you have a great rest of your day, and we will see you next time. All right,
Thanks.
Thank you.